the cloud. Okay, we're live and recording. So, and this is not a presentation, by the way. This is just going to be like our meetup, but I wanted to make sure we capture it on video so that anyone else who isn't able to make it this time for whatever reason can capture it. So, okay, good. Why don't we do like we used to do in person? And I think we have a couple of faces who haven't all been in the same room at one time. So I'll start, but why don't we go around and just say, you know, who we are, what we're into, and maybe something interesting about yourself or something. All right. So unfortunately, I think you all know who I am. I'm Chad Sutton. I'm one of the managing partners of Next Gen Real Capital. You know, real estate investor by generations. So I'm number 3 in the family doing this at this point, trying to scale into bigger and better things. So, you know, we're primarily playing in multifamily at the moment. We've almost got into commercial real estate. Kind of glad I didn't do that at the moment. But I'm sure that'll come back. And what I mentioned to a couple of guys on the call earlier is one fun fact is my little girl is actually taking a bath right behind us right now. So if you hear splashing or a little squealing every now and then, that's why. So we'll see how that goes. But Trey, you want to go?
Sure. I'm Trey Culpepper.
By the way, so.
I'm Trey Culpepper. I work with GBT Realty Corporation. We focus right now, my group at the company focuses on retail acquisitions. So I'm on the commercial real estate side. There's not much on the acquisition front in the current environment today outside of single tenant out parcels are about the only things that are still transacting at the moment, but we're starting to see some grocery anchored centers come out, and hopefully things pick back up as we come out of this. The COVID pandemic really made us focus on asset management and learn details I don't think we necessarily knew as a team better throughout the whole process. So there has been some good, but it's challenging times. I mean, we're spending a lot of our days on the phone with tenants, just trying to get people to pay rent. So Chad, you probably made a good call on holding off of commercial real estate, at least for the time being. But with challenges, opportunities always present themselves. So I think we'll find stuff that comes out of it, but excited that Chad's putting this on as we're looking to potentially get into some multifamily acquisitions. And it's helpful to learn the nuances that are different in multifamily versus retail. And an interesting fact about me, I owned a school bus in my senior year of high school and freshman year of college. So it was a tailgate mobile. I lived in Jacksonville, Florida, and took it to Jaguar games, and then went to University of Florida and took it with me to Gainesville. So worked a couple summer jobs and was able to get a bus to tailgate with, which was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. I bet that was incredible.
It was.
I'm going to challenge everyone for extra credit. If you can dig up a picture of Trey in a school bus, that'd be awesome.
I'll have to find one, dig one out, and share it next meetup.
Awesome. Well, Trey, you get to pass the torch. Who goes next?
Let's pass it over to Trevor.
Okay, thank you. Hey, everybody, my name is Trevor Holland. I see some familiar faces and names on the chat. I'm really just excited about this class, and I joined this class to meet with people with high networks that are doing things like Chad and other people in the multi-unit family. I'm trying to transition from single family into multi-unit, and that's my main goal for passive income. And an interesting fact is, next July I'll be getting married.
Oh, congrats!
Thank you. Then I guess it's my turn to pass the torch.
Sorry, Trevor. Was waiting till July a factor of COVID, or was that the original plan?
That's a good question. So we was really supposed to get married this up and coming August.
Yeah.
But everything has just kind of went downhill when the pandemic came. So we decided to push it back so all the family be able to come and feel safe.
Well, congrats, man. We're happy for you.
Thank you.
All right, pass the torch. Your deal.
All right, let's see who we got on here. We're going to pass it to Miss Christie.
There she is.
My name is Christy Sampras, and my husband and I have been doing some dabbling in real estate for the past 5 years. Done a kind of the traditional of starting of buying, fixing, flipping, buying, holding, selling. We have a small multi-unit right now, and we are looking to grow our business in the near future. And we've been, for the past year or so, we have been accumulating information and studying on how to more thoroughly underwrite and understand that whole process and get better resources, better connections with that whole gamut. We are excited to get into more. We're actually the part of COVID-19 that hasn't affected us we've actually been doing great with our renters. So that's the most stable part of our life right now. So for us, we're yes, even more so, this is an incentive to continue on our path. But I hope y'all can still hear me. It says my internet connection is unstable. But anyway, so we are looking to see what strategies to take advantage of in the next coming months, and just continue growing and getting bigger. That's what we want to do. That's our path. And so I love these underwriting classes. I'm such a dork for it. So bring it on.
Awesome. Thank you.
I am extremely pregnant. I guess that's the fun fact about me. I'm 32 weeks yesterday. So, I could go any minute. No, most likely I'll go late. But so I'll be going at the end of July or August. But if I can help it at all, I will be on that Zoom meeting right after the baby if I can help it.
All right. Well, lucky for you, we've had some nicer days this year, so maybe you haven't been too miserable.
I like it that much. I'm glad you're recording that.
That's awesome.
I'll pass it on. I did lose a little bit of a connection there for a little bit, so I don't know if anybody went before Trey, but if Adam didn't go, then I'll pass it on to Adam.
All right, that'll work. Adam, you're up, brother.
I have not gone. So I'm Adam Milner. I work with Clark.
Be all right. Okay. Did Adam hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
he did. I think you have a little delay, but yeah, he's good.
I'm Adam Milner. I work with Clark Construction. We're a commercial general contractor nationwide. We've been in Nashville for about 10 years. Did the Music City Convention Center, and then me personally, I'm working on the Grand Hyatt on Broadway as a senior PM, and pushing right now towards the finish line here in the fall. My interest in started with single family and then multifamily about 6 months ago, and listening to podcasts, and then found this through meetup.com, and just said, I'd like to start learning and potentially get into doing some investing in the multifamily space. Really hoping to use the past 10 years that I've at Clark Construction and learning the construction side to bring it over to multifamily and do some value add and understand schedule and what improvements should and shouldn't be done. So that's my reason for being here. And I, being friends with Trey and also a fellow Gator, I've almost found a bus pick, but I found some better ones that maybe when we get back together, I'll share and not share through the Zoom. And then My weird or fun fact is I'm allergic to caffeine, which surprises a lot of people.
I guess that's a good thing.
So no coffee or caffeinated sodas for me.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank y'all for being here. I think Brandon said he didn't have a mic, so Brandon, do you want to type anything, or you want me to? I guess I know he's a pretty bright young software engineer, but I don't know if we'll give him a second to type anything if he wants. But, I thought I saw a chat pop up. Where'd it go? Chat 3. He's an engineer at HCA and Sarah Cannon. So, well, Brandon, I'm sorry you don't have a camera or a microphone this time. We'll have to catch you next time. Okay, been doing stock market most of his life and trying to get into real estate as well. So for those of you who haven't met Brandon, super sharp guy. I've went and had coffee with him a time or two. So Brandon, we'll have to all send you a camera for next time. So. All right, let's get into it. We probably won't go the whole time tonight. But this is Multifamily Underwriting University, and we actually combined with Multifamily Investor Nation. I was supposed to have another meetup earlier tonight, but the topics were going to be the same, so just decided to do it this way. Everyone has probably seen this before, but just so you guys know, all of this information is available on our Google Drive link under the About section of our meetup group, or on our website at nextgenrealcapital.com/meetups. You can find the link to that there. So I think y'all have all seen this before. Just so you guys keep tabs on what's coming up, we did shift it around a little bit to make June, how to underwrite in COVID-19. And everything that was showing from June on, we've just bumped back 1 month. So next month, we'll probably get into specifically income forecasting and some details around that. It's kind of one thing you don't want to get wrong, and then we'll, get into CapEx and expenses more detailed, and then talk a little bit about debt versus the capital stack in detail as far as how you assemble money to take one of these down in the most efficient way. And then if we haven't started looping back around on these things or going deeper into something else by the end of the year, we'll probably start doing a deal of the month or something like that. But any questions on that? Again, I think y'all have all seen this before. So, all right. So COVID-19, and this is a discussion. So I know, Trey, you've had some experiences, especially if you have something that kind of corroborates from the commercial real estate side. I'd love to hear that as well, what you guys are feeling. But just got a couple of slides here of things that we've been seeing and observations we've been making. So one of them is the debt market. I'm sure you guys saw on the news that the economy has basically crashed and we're in a recession, right? So anyone not know that by chance? Okay. Well, surprise, we're here. Everyone's been talking about a recession for the longest time. I think what this has taught us, just like, sorry, let me put my chat window up here so I can see this here. An actual recession, yes. Where was I going with that? Sorry, I didn't know it was that bad. Yeah, Brandon, we're in a recession. It's definitely come. So I mean, what this has taught us is every time we have a recession, like last time it was a financial collapse, right? This time it was caused by businesses having to shut their doors and people getting laid off because we had a health crisis. It just goes to show us that as much as we try to predict a recession, we never can quite put our finger on the cause, and it's unpredictable a little bit. So anyway, and I was in the middle of an acquisition when this happened. So mid-March, as the economy began to crash, what happened? Well, the debt market seized up as well. And Trey, I don't know if you saw this on commercial real estate as well, but especially everyone who was lending on borrowed funds. So anyone who was aggregating loans and selling them on the debt market, there is a market for debt as well, by the way. So when just like there's a market for buying and selling commercial property or residential property, as soon as, someone like Hunt Real Estate Capital, that they're going to, originate, probably 50 million in loans, they're going to package it all up into a mortgage-backed security or something, and they're going to go sell it on the open market. Well, when that market starts to crash, all of a sudden they're not able to hit their margin calls or basically predict what they're going to be able to sell the thing for. So they just stop. Everyone just quit lending for the most part at this time. Many of them just pulled their chips off the table mid-deal. And we had one going on that I think I've told you guys about, 67 units in Knoxville was supposed to close on March 30th. And we were there. All the money was raised. We were 12 days from closing. And our lender just said, look, we're going to stop doing loans right now. So we had to basically start over and go negotiate contract extensions and we had to put up more money and do all this kind of stuff, which we had to come to several decision points of, look, do we just take a loss right now on the $100,000 we had hard and walk away? I mean, we actually came out with a better situation, fortunately, but yeah, many of them just kind of stepped back, and then you started to see all the hard money lenders and the short-term bridge guys who basically are lending off of their own balance sheet, like they're not borrowing funds from somebody else. They start showing up with quick close options to the tune of 9 to 12%, what I call predatory lending, and trying to help people get deals closed, right? So from what I can see, in uncertain times, lenders are really predictable, right? If there's any uncertainty whatsoever, all of a sudden they view risk as high, so leverage goes down. We've been seeing a lot of, where you could get 80% leverage on a multifamily property, in a primary market, you're looking at, 70, 75 at best right now. And in a tertiary market, probably downwards of 65, really depending on how it's performed through all this. And the biggest thing is the escrows, right? So it's like Fannie and Freddie have proudly touted that they've been open for business this whole time and that they're still liquid and still lending funds. Well, that's true, but they're also requiring every buyer right now, at least in multifamily, to bring 18 months of principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and CapEx reserve payments, right? That's a big number of extra money to bring to the table, but your terms are the same, right? So the lesson from our side, and I'd love to hear any other input anyone has seen through this whole process on the debt market, but the lesson from our side, I felt like we had a really good understanding of the debt market before. We really do now, because we learned that, how your lenders are going to kind of interview you and make sure that you're going to be able to come up with the capital to close, and you're going to be able to have the means to run that business and repay that capital that they're lending to you. You've got to interview them just as hard and understand where are they getting their money from, because there's a big difference in someone who has the money in a fund or in the bank and can lend out of that at their own discretion versus someone who is borrowing money from someone else to turn around and lend to you at a spread, right? And there's a lot of lenders out there who are basically effectively just lending, get government money and hoping to sell it back to the government, right? So that was a huge lesson learned on our part. But what have you guys seen re-debt market? Trey or Trevor or anybody?
Yeah, it's on the commercial real estate side, especially for retail, a lot of the options completely dried up. The CMBS or commercial mortgage-backed securities, just like the pool you were talking about for RBS, for residential-backed securities, where originators pool together a bunch of assets, that's completely shut down, and I have not heard of new CMBS being issued yet. If it is, it's institutional groups like REITs that are going out and placing a bunch of assets in a pool that's backed by one sponsor. But for the most part, that's still shut down. At least for retail, there's a chance that other asset classes are getting packaged up. And we even saw a number of the banks that we work with, large national banks, put a temporary hold on new deals, and even they are pretty hesitant to lend additional money for good news money if you have deals that were teed up before going into this. They're asking that we wait 60 to 90 days, get leases fully in hand, before they're really even to try to take anything into committee. Their biggest fear is going into committee and triggering an appraisal, and appraisals being so wonky right now that forcing you to have to come out of pocket to come back in balance if appraisal value has gone down substantially from the last time you had it appraised. So it's Lifeco is out there for good grocery anchored centers, but the Lifeco market has dried up pretty substantially too. And I think the debt funds, which is really the bridge lenders that we deal with for the most part, they're about the only option to go. And just like you said, Chad, their interest rates and upfront fees and everything they're looking for makes a deal impossible if you wanted to try to get one done right now. I think everyone in the retail side of the business, unless you're coming up with a loan that's due and you can't work something out with your bank to get an extension, everybody's holding and just waiting to see when things reopen, what tenants fail from this and what tenants really need help. And we're probably 3 to 6 months on a best case scenario of really having an idea kind of across the country on what that looks like. So it's an interesting time, but you're right. I mean, the lenders are not in the business to lose money. So if there's any risk involved and they perceive risk, it's easier to just walk away and not be involved in making a deal happen, because they don't get any upside when things go well. And then just an interesting fact, we did develop 2 multifamily apartment complexes here in Nashville. We did Village 21 over by Vandy and Belcourt Apartments that were a block or 2 down the road. We were under contract on both of those in February. It was a pretty competitive process. CB was our broker. They got a pretty substantial deposit up front, and the buyer called us on a Thursday. I want to say it was like the 12th of March and said, they were probably a week into 30 days of due diligence. They said, we will waive all costs. We will figure out prorations after we close. We have to close tomorrow because our lender has an out if we don't close tomorrow. So they didn't want to risk the money they had hard, losing it and rolling the dice to see what the lender would do. So they moved forward and just were ready to close as is, knowing they could find a lot of stuff after closing and be stuck with it, but they didn't want to walk away from their deposit. So, it's the debt side's interesting, and when you get into crisis and when things get risky.
Very interesting. I want to come back to some of the things you said in about 2 slides when we get to like the not the concessions, but how things have been operating. It's very interesting, some of that perspective. Let's see. I guess so I guess just this slide real quick, and then we'll talk about just like what you were on right there, Trey. So just to give you guys an idea of, I got these terms today for something I'm looking at that'll be closing much later this year, but with the 10-year Treasury being where it is right now, I mean, you've got to account for this stuff if you're trying to underwrite anything right now, by the way. So make sure you're staying abreast on debt terms day by day, because they are changing pretty rapidly. The good thing is, because we're in a recession, and if you know how the basic economic machine works, if not, there's a guy named Ray Dalio who has a great video about that. Rates are probably not going up anytime soon, right? The one thing that the Fed will do to try and stimulate growth in the economy is lower interest rates. And Fannie and Freddie's rates and most other people's in modern society are dependent on the T-bill or prime rate or something like that, all of which are pretty well bottomed out at the moment. So Fannie and Freddie have put a 90 basis point floor from the 10-year, which means their rates are right around 3.6 to 3.8%, which is still fantastic, right? So, I mean, if you can make the numbers work, it's still a great time to originate a loan, provided you understand how your piece of property is performing that you're looking at. We're still seeing interest only quotes, at least. I'm not sure how they're closing yet, but at least we're seeing interest only quotes coming in at 3 to 4 years interest only. or 3 to 4 years on a typical property. However, leverage, as we mentioned, leverage is down. So if you're looking in a primary market, I've preached about this for the past 6 months. 80% is great, but it is the exception, right? We can't always count on that. And as soon as there's signs of trouble, 80% has evaporated. And you're starting to see 70 to 75%, which is more typical over the long haul in a primary and secondary market. I haven't looked at a lot of tertiary stuff, but the people who are talking to me about deals like this or asking me to sponsor them are between 65 and 70% leverage. So it's quite a bit lower than it has been. I mean, we were even seeing Freddie Mac small balance loan give 80% in some tertiary markets just mere months ago. So that's pretty much recoiled from where we were. And this is a huge thing. Like, I want to make sure to explain this for those who are starting to underwrite properties. You've got to get this right up front, because if you get under contract on a property and you don't know what the escrow requirements are going to be for these lenders up front, this could wildly affect how much you're able to pay for the property if you're doing a return-based analysis on it. Because I mean, if we're talking, simply the cash on cash return number, that if that denominator explodes of cash you bring to the table and your income stays the same or even drops a little bit, your return just got a whole lot worse. So at least what Fannie and Freddie are requiring is this 18 months escrow of principal, insurance, taxes, principal and interest, taxes and insurance, and then any CapEx reserves that they want you to hold. Now, the good thing is this isn't a fee, right? This is just extra cash you have to bring to the table. They're going to put it in an account just like they would for anything else they would escrow. And in 12 months, I'm sure there's some stipulations, but they're saying 12 months post origination, as long as things have gone relatively okay, they'll release that. I haven't entered a deal with them lately, so I don't know what those details are, but I'm sure read the fine print if you get into it, because I'm sure there's going to be, thou shalt maintain X amount of occupancy for X many months or something like that before they release it. But make no mistake, if this continues, this will drive prices of real estate down, because the amount of money people are going to be able to pay for a property, given that they have to bring more money to the table, is going to go down. Interest rates are not the only thing that drives it, right? When interest rates are up, cap rates go up with it, which means prices go down. This is also going to hurt that. So keep an eye out for that. I'm going to be real curious to see how this unfolds over the next several months. And then timing. I mean, you got to think about all the things you have to put together for getting a deal done. And that's, including things like what Trey was talking about, appraisals. That's done by a third-party company, and they typically have to go in at least a few units, right? Engineering reports, or, anything, property conditions and analysis. I mean, anything like that that's requiring people to go to properties. It may be getting better now, but you got to think for those several months that things were closed down, there's a little bit of a backlog there as well. So between that and if you're getting a bank loan, I mean, those same bankers that are administering the payroll protection program, that's the huge stimulus package, are the same ones who are trying to approve your loan, right? So things are just taking longer right now. So time is not on your side. The two biggest things to watch out for right now, at least on the debt side, is the escrow requirements and how long it's going to take you to close. So in your contracts, you've got to be baking in, at least two, in my opinion, lender extensions. And I've even started putting what's called a force majeure clause in for any kind of contract we're using right now, which basically means that if there's an act of God or a pandemic or something like that, that's not going to, and I'm not unable to close on time, that's not lack of performance on my part. That's an uncontrollable act of God or war or whatever you call it, right? Any questions on that part? Comments at all?
So did you have any that were trying to close during the pandemic that couldn't, where you got a problem because you didn't have that force majeure clause?
Yes, I did. And unfortunately, I've known about this for a long time. I mean, I've negotiated contracts in corporate America before this life for many years. And I've known about force majeure clauses, but it was never really an accepted practice in real estate, at least not in multifamily real estate and a buyer's market or a seller's market rather. But yeah, we have, and this deal is still ongoing. I mean, we had to go negotiate a 3-month extension. The only reason we agreed to put up more money is we kind of discovered a better loan structure that's really unaffected by this pandemic. But no, we came very close to just like when March 18th hit and our lender walked away 12 days before closing, we were calling 5 to 7 new lenders every day, trying to, and we would get them oriented on the deal, and the next day they would stop lending. And then we call 5 to 7 more. We would orient them on the deal. The next day they stopped lending, right? So it was like we were chasing a boulder down the hill as we're getting closer and closer to close. And then, long story short, we discovered a different kind of lender we didn't know existed that lends off their balance sheet and is also doing tax credit type stuff. And that's how it worked out. But yes, it put us in a position of severe weakness because we, like Trey was talking about, we already had hard funds, right? So, we were almost close. Like I let the funds go hard because we'd done everything we needed to do. Like we were buying these properties, right? But when all of a sudden you have to negotiate for more time, you're kind of in a position of weakness at that point. And this seller he's trying to 1031 these into another property. So he also has a seller he's negotiating with. So it was like, basically trying to convince the seller of my seller that we could push the deal, So yeah, we definitely were affected by this. It was, I don't want to say a lesson learned because I knew it wasn't in the contract, but I think I'm going to be a little more bullheaded about that in the future, despite what the market condition is,
It's interesting to learn what is and is not normal within these real estate deals. Like, so on the construction side, force majeure is always in our contract.
Yeah.
And even, when I first started, that's in there. And so we're even figuring that force majeure doesn't necessarily mean that you can recover everything. And so we're determining, do we consider this a force majeure event, or do we legally call it like a delay claim instead of force majeure?
Yeah.
So
y'all have like liquidated damages and stuff built into your contract. Yeah. I mean, that sounds more like a service provider contract, like what I've done in the past, but not for construction. So that's interesting to know that that's a commonplace. And I guess it makes sense because you have a lot more, uncontrollable elements that affect schedule, right?
Right. So the force majeure, if we claim it as force majeure, it allows the finishing of the job to be delayed. However, we can't recover any financial loss. So if a job goes longer, that means we've got people on the job longer. We got to pay those salaries, but that's not something that we in a force majeure event can recover.
That's interesting. So force majeure construction, it basically means they can't hold you liable for LDs or anything like that, but any cost overages incurred, you have to eat it. That's your cap.
Correct. So we're still not quite sure how we're going to approach that, but because, facilities close down and you can't get doors, or people decide they don't feel safe coming to work. And do we claim it as a force majeure event, or do we claim it some other crafty way? We don't know yet.
That's interesting. It's very interesting.
To build on top of that, we've had a lot of tenants, mostly larger national tenants, that right when everything shut down, sent letters that they were unilaterally deciding not to pay rent, or opening up the door to negotiate how we work through it, and a lot throughout force majeure. And most retail leases have force majeure language in it. A lot of times it is a lot. What's that?
You said leases have force majeure built in?
Leases do.
That's a different world, brother.
Yeah. Wow. It's usually built in around build out, like a tenant build out and delivery. Even though a lot of nationals were claiming it, our legal position has been that it doesn't apply to financial obligations. So we're taking our time to negotiate or work through what we're going to do with the larger tenants, because smaller tenants need the help first. But I think force majeure is going to be a big topic over the next 6 to 12 months and probably get litigated pretty substantially, because it can be viewed or argued in so many different ways. I mean, hopefully your contract, whatever contract you're in, be it construction, purchase and sale agreement, or a lease, clearly defines it. But a lot of times lawyers leave it more vague so that there's the option to go fight it down the road should you need to use it.
Yeah, it's intentionally left vague. You're right. I've seen that before. That could be a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
The things you were saying right there, though, I want to come back to what you just said about the bigger tenants, fighting you a little bit. It's like it seems like, and I'm not in this industry, so I mean, we'll talk about what happens to multifamily tenants, but it seems like a lot of the bigger tenants with clout, like a Dollar General or a Starbucks or something like that, they're kind of strong arming their owners, right? And saying, look, we're not paying rent. Like, you want us to leave? Fine, we'll leave. Good luck filling the space. It's one of those kind of things. Is that what y'all are experiencing, or how true is it?
It varies. I think a lot of the large tenants took that stance right at the beginning. And as more information came out, you had a couple retailers that went back and decided to start paying their landlords. Ulta was a good example. Burlington has been a good example that's come back and sent in payment after getting a non-payment letter. I think Adidas originally wasn't going to pay, came back and started paying. But there's been a handful that just aren't paying at all, haven't heard anything from. Great credit. The large retailers went fully drew down on their lines. And a lot of our position as we talk through and try to work out deals with all of our tenants is going to be what the bank's doing. Most of our relationship banks offered some type of deferment for principal and interest, 3 months or so. But you talk about CMBS, and you're lucky if you can get them to let you draw on your reserves to pay interest for a couple months, principal and interest for a couple months. And they're not doing any type of deferment. They're not doing any type of forbearance or abatement on your debt service payments. So if you have enough large tenants that don't pay it, and you're a small landlord that doesn't have a balance sheet or doesn't have corporate lines of credit you can go draw down on, a lot of landlords are having to go to special servicing when you're in that circumstance. I think we're going to see that continue to happen more and more, both in retail and commercial real estate and in residential. I mean, I think I read the default rates on multifamily deals were up substantially more in May than they were in April.
Yeah, that's an incredible piece of insight there. And just to unpack that a little bit, I mean, you mentioned a couple of key things there, like some of your banks or your portfolio lenders who effectively they hold the note and they have the income producing asset that is your mortgage. Some of them have decided, we don't want to take properties back. Let's just give them a little bit of relief. We will take a cash flow cut and we'll just let them survive, right? And that's best case scenario for an owner, because then you can give it's a trickle down effect, right? The lender gives you a break. You can then give your tenants a break. They can then give their employees a break, in commercial real estate. Whereas mortgage-backed security, they're accountable to investors and to an entire market of their own. So like if they start giving you a break, it's not that they just won't because they don't have the kindness in their heart. An entire financial industry will collapse. And then we're in 2008, right? I mean, that's for anyone who remembers that time when 2008 happened. At that time, it was mostly banks and financial institutions that were involved in debt servicing, right, and being a servicer. Well, a lot of them got out of that business. So a lot of the companies now that are doing that are just, really small, non-financially backed institutions that are originating loans and servicing them. Well, if all of a sudden let's go one step up the chain, tenants stop paying owners stop paying servicers, there's a very thin line of those collapsing before the entire debt market and securities market behind that collapses, right? So like that could put us into a total financial meltdown, which a lot of people have been talking about lately. But very interesting times. It's all one big hairball machine, you know. Anyway, so in terms of from the multifamily side, you know, changes in economic vacancy. Just for reminder, we talk about vacancy, you know, physical vacancy, and then concessions and non-payment. You add those two, so concessions and non-payment are things you're having to give away to get people to move in and pay rent, and non-payment is somebody living there who's not paying rent. So you add that to your physical vacancy, which are apartments that don't have anybody in it. You have what's termed your economic vacancy. That's basically, you know, anyone in a unit not paying, anyone not in a unit that's empty, and anything you're having to give away to get people to pay. Well, this is an interesting thing to unpack, because at least on the residential side, you know, as tenants lose their jobs, especially low to mid income, right, who are probably working in the restaurant industry or some, you know, lower level job that an employer is going to consider expendable, right? They were kind of the ones who were most immediately affected by this. Now, April and May showed this is something to watch out for. So April and May, everyone was so worried about collections in April and May. Lenders were, owners were, like we had no idea. We're like, you know, we're going to see, is anyone going to pay? Mr. Trump said they didn't have to, you know? So it was one of those things where you can design a business. This is coming from someone who designed aircraft engines for a while. We design things to fly and let a couple of birds fly through them without falling out of the sky, right? Well, you can't design something to withstand a deer going through it, right? I mean, it would be so beefy it won't fly. Same thing goes with a business. You can never cushion yourself enough in any kind of business to have your revenue stream turn off, right? You will bleed out. So it was somewhere between, okay, well, we design these things to have maybe 30% vacancy tolerance or more, but what if nobody pays, you know? So that was the kind of things we were worried about. But it seems like April and May collections, at least in multifamily, have actually been okay for the large portion of the industry. And we're kind of attributing that to either, you know, the nicer class apartments where people didn't lose their jobs, they just worked from home, or the ones where they did lose their jobs, people got their stimulus checks and they paid rent. Well, as that stimulus money starts to dry up, that's where we're starting to question lenders' behavior, because they're also seeing this. Okay, well, what happens once that money's gone? Are they still going to be able to pay rent? You know, so it's going to be interesting to see as lenders look towards the summer in you know, July and August, how different asset classes perform and how they continue to originate loans on those asset classes. But what we found is highly necessary is being extremely proactive with tenants. And, you know, we've actually put processes in place for handling delinquent rents. Like everyone has to understand, rent is not forgiven. And we're very careful to craft letters of, look, you know, it costs money to maintain this beautiful place you live in, right? And, you know, help us take care of the place that you live. If you have a COVID-induced financial emergency, we will work with you. We will put you on you know, like, you can't just let them think it's forgiven, but we'll put you on a rent deferral program, or maybe you can't pay for a couple of months, but we'll just raise the rent from August through December by $15 or something to catch you up. You know, like there's things like that we had to do. And then things like, you know, foregoing late fees. You got to be a human, right? Because some of these people are going through a really scary time.
And are you providing those options to the tenants before they ask, or are you waiting for the tenant to raise their hand or not make a payment and then say, hey, we noticed you didn't make your payment, we have options, or reach out to them? Like, how do you decide, send this to everybody and let people make, you know, take what we're offering, or do we only send it out to the ones that are showing a problem?
Well, you can't do that. That's a fair housing issue. But whether or not we talked about it beforehand or whether or not we just waited for the ball to drop, I've been in different arguments with different panel discussions and owners about this. And it's like, everyone has their own way and it depends on your tenant base. For us, we prefer over communication and being ahead of the ball. So we were very careful not to open the can of worms too early, but at, you know, probably 3 days before April 1st, right? We put a letter out and we basically were like, you know, effectively, here's what's going on. we're here for you, but we still have obligations as well. Like we kind of let them know that we're not just big bad landlord who is taking your money. Like we have obligations too. And, it's kind of a ripple effect, but, we told them about the deferral program ahead of time, just so that, you didn't want people having the unknown. You didn't want people just choosing not to pay, but we had to let them know also that you had to prove to us that you have a COVID emergency. Like we had a form you fill out. It had a place for you to put your employer's contact number, so we could actually verify if you were laid off. Okay, but you can't just be someone saying, I'm going to save up some money and go buy a flat screen TV because the TV said I don't have to pay rent, So
Yep.
our answer was proactive, and Trey, I'm sure you have a completely different perspective on this because people were probably coming to you saying I'm not paying rent rather than.
They were, and we went back and forth, got in a bunch of forums with other landlords and debated internally what route we wanted to take. And ultimately, we didn't want to rush into anything quickly. We felt we were like you. We needed to get out our stance on that we still had obligations that we were going to be upheld to, and still communicating that, especially for the young guys, hey, we want to help you where we can and help get through this. We want you to come out on the backside. But ultimately tried to push down any quick decisions. There were a handful, like all the big tenants sent stuff quickly, stopped paying rent. And there were a handful of people that just signed whatever amendment they sent so that they wouldn't lose a large tenant or get something done and taken care of, and you take the unknown risk off.
Yeah.
And most of those initial offers tenants made have been backtracked at some point. So if you were somebody that jumped in quickly to negotiate or agree to something, it ended up hurting you as a landlord on the back end. But communication was key. I mean, we set up a task force internally to make sure property management was talking directly to every tenant and continuing to follow up. I mean, the Paycheck Protection Program was a big piece with a lot of our tenants, a lot of the small tenants, and the only offers we've made so far have been deferrals to small tenants. And surprisingly, I'd say 70% of tenants turned it down, said, look, we don't need help yet. When we do, we'll let you know, but that paying you rent will let us turn this loan into a grant. Let's revisit a month, 2 months from now as we get reopened and have the expenses associated with that.
Seems like that was a wise move that they made in legislature there, right? Of making it forgivable for certain amounts of payroll coverage. I think it was 75%, right? Payroll coverage, and the rest could be taxes or mortgage interest and things of that sort, right?
Yep, and rent.
Yeah.
And I think utilities. So,
Okay.
But like we dug in, we had somebody that was trying to stay on top of the legislation as it came out because it constantly changed. It still is. We're trying to get info to tenants of how they'll apply for forgiveness. And you got to step lightly. Like we can't offer legal advice, but at the same time, we want to help get that information out, help tenants. I mean, our biggest thing was let tenants help themselves and do anything we can to encourage that.
I'm so glad you just said that, Trey, because that reminded me. And to go back to your question, Adam, part of our over communication strategy was making sure our tenants understood how they can get rental assistance, right? Like they had to understand where can they go to get that stimulus money? Where can they go to get help from a church or whatever local thing was available there? That way, we at least gave them a chance to help themselves before we gave it to them on a platter, right? So that's really good, Trey. That's crazy times.
Absolutely.
I guess the other big thing is, and everyone's heard about the eviction moratoriums, right? Which, I mean, we're all humans here. Nobody wants to evict someone in their time of need, right? That's like you evict people for intentionally being a bad tenant, not for losing their job on a mass basis, right? But that is the reality for all federally backed loans. I think I haven't checked up in a while, but last I checked, it was end of July was the national eviction moratorium before anyone with a federally backed loan, which is a lot of multifamily, can legally evict anybody. And the reason behind that is they're trying to prevent a mass, homelessness problem. Because if you get evicted and don't have a job, you're not going to qualify anywhere else, right? It's difficult as an owner, but I see why they did it. And I think it was wise that they're doing that, because if you had that problem, you're just going to wind up with a vacancy problem across the nation and a homeless problem at the same time. So it wouldn't be good for anybody. But okay, so last couple of bits here, and then I think let me see if this is it. Yeah. So last couple of bits here. How do you amend your underwriting at this point? And I think my favorite part about this is a lot of people are in denial. We're in a recession, period, the end, right? This is what it looks like. It may turn into a depression. I hope not, but it seems like the Fed and the government are doing all the right things to get money flowing where it needs to be. Now we're going to feel it in inflation later, but that's not the point. Cash flow is lifeblood, and they're trying to make sure the wheels keep turning and they don't seize up like they have in past recessions. But for deals in progress, and I'm sure this goes for commercial as well, but you should be doing this anyway, but monitor collections month over month, notice any trends, and don't be afraid to go back and renegotiate, because there are some deals that are trucking through this just fine. Like I've on the apartments I own, I've collected 100% of rents. A couple of them are late, but I've collected 100% of rents in the last 2 months of people who were in units. Now we had some units that we were in the middle of turning when this happened, and those sat vacant for a little while because nobody was moving when you're on stay-at-home orders, right? Then we also want to be able to account for the additional leverage and escrow limitations that are when you're building your pro forma. So like I said, account for that extra money you have to bring to the table. That's a big deal. Account for the fact that you're probably not going to see as high of leverage as you did before. That means you're bringing more money to the table. All those things hurt returns, right? Doesn't mean you can't do a deal. Just means you have to make sure you account for it up front, because you never have more negotiating power than before you enter that contract. And don't be afraid to renegotiate. I mean, there's retrading because you didn't do your homework, and then there's retrading because the situation is changing under your feet. And valuations are changing as we speak. Like there are going to be distressed sales coming in all aspects of real estate. Even though multifamily is proving to be one of the more resilient in this time, as are mobile home parks, interestingly, there will actually be a lot of distressed sales coming up, and it's going to bring the mean line down. So be ready for that. And we've taken an extra underwriting step that, like, when I go through a rent roll now, I ask for leases, and I ask for, if they have it available, the last known job of the tenant, or at least the industry. And we run, I mean, you can't really bias it this way. Like, you don't really want to say, I'm not going to rent to tenants who work in this industry. That's a fair housing problem, but you can at least understand what their job loss exposure is. Like if a tenant base on a building you're trying to buy is 87% retail or restaurant, you might have to at least make sure you've got enough reserves to weather a couple months of really low collections, because that may happen, right? So I mean, remember, the only way you ever lose your building is you don't pay the mortgage and the bank takes it back, right? So if that's the case, you may want to up your reserve requirement a little bit and make sure you've got enough money in the bank. And if it's a Class C apartment building, or C minus, C plus, something like that, that may have a higher economic vacancy exposure temporarily. Now, those are still in high demand and there's still a shortage. So once the eviction moratorium lifts and people start to move a little bit, you may be, as long as you're a competitive and nicer Class C apartment, you're probably going to remain full and remain operating at a pretty high collections rate. But you got to watch that when you're taking buildings over and you don't understand the tenant base. Whereas a white collar job tenant base, like in your luxury, your Belcourt or something like that, right? They're going to probably just be working from home, and it's going to be business as usual. So, what other thoughts do y'all have? I mean, anything else you guys have seen or want to add to this discussion or ask about?
So how do you judge or look at what industry the tenants are in and stay out of any fair housing issues, right? So, I mean, do you 80% are in restaurant industry? You're not going to rent, you don't want to rent to that apartment complex. How do you evaluate that?
Yeah, let me
Not get in trouble.
let me clarify. I'm not saying that for leases you're originating. I'm saying look at it for the leases that are in place on the building you're buying. So it's you're right. You can't really just decline leases fairly because of profession, unless it's an illegal profession, right? And it's more about when I'm actually evaluating a building for purchase, or I'm evaluating my own building that I already have. I'm looking at it from that perspective to evaluate my risk and decide how much cash. It's all about how much cash reserves I want to keep realistically, right? So if I see it's a high risk population, we're going to want to account for keeping more money in the bank, right?
Right.
Yeah. So not saying it all do unfair housing practices. I'm not saying that at all. Good question though. Trevor, Christy, y'all been quiet. Any questions or any comments?
Oh no, I'm just taking it all in.
Cool, man.
Yeah,
Dad, are you seeing?
same here.
Oops.
We have a working class, and we've been very fortunate, and I mean, we have much fewer tenants, but we have all working class, and they've all been paying rent. We even we had a vacancy when this whole thing happened, and actually my husband did get infected with COVID-19, so we were kind of out of pocket for a month and had a vacant apartment purely because we couldn't go show it. But I mean, we've been fortunate, but it might be because we're way out, and people like calling us all the time trying to rent our apartment. We're like, can we meet you in 2 weeks? Well, fortunately, we haven't had to deal with a whole lot.
That's good. That's good. And that reminds me, by the way, I mean, another thing we did, and I don't know if this helps or not, but if you ever get in a situation where you can't show an apartment, we pushed our property managers to start doing virtual tours. Like we had them go out there with a cell phone and take some nice video of the apartment. And they went and I said, go learn on YouTube how to edit a video and put some music behind it and a few, words or stuff. And they made some decent little videos of our available apartments to where people could just look at them on YouTube before that helped a lot, so that's good.
Hey, Chad, I had a quick question.
That is.
What's up, Trevor?
So I know you say you will up your reserves. So if you bought an apartment during this crisis, so how much? So would it be like a particular formula, like times the rent, maybe by an extra 12 months you would put in reserve, or how would you calculate that?
This is something that comes with experience. I'm gonna try to put some number on it, and it's your comfort level, right? So
Okay.
I like to have enough cash in the bank to float for 6 months if I have to, right? And that's 6 months of business as usual. I can stretch longer if I start trimming the fat, right? It's just a feel good point for me. Now, for me, if 6 months is my average time where I want to have all 6 months of all my operating expenses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my debt service, then yeah, if I say, well, I'm higher risk because of this, maybe I decide I want an extra 3 months, or if your comfort spot is 3 months, maybe you just I kind of tend to do it in terms of quarters of the year. I don't know why, but if it's when I'm estimating and underwriting, it's like, okay, do I want half a year, 3/4 of a year, a full year? If I'm aggressive, maybe it's only 3 months reserves. It depends on all that, but it also depends on my loan structure. So a loan I'm doing right now on that property I told you about that we kind of got in trouble on during the closing. We have a capital expense loan. So not only are they giving us the acquisition loan, but we're getting debt for the renovations we need to do, which is the cheaper way to do it. In this case, and so I'm keeping a little less reserves because I basically just need enough to front about 6 weeks of renovation, and then have my 3 months of downtime money if I need to. So if I have that opportunity where I don't need to hold all the acquisition costs in the bank, then I can let that go down a little bit too, or all the rehab costs rather.
Okay.
Does that make sense at all?
It does.
Okay. Well, I guess we're about an hour in. Anything else you guys want to chat about, or any other topics?
What are some of the other things that you've learned during this COVID that you can either outsource or make a video of, or, kind of change your ways to work through this, and that you will continue doing even when this is over?
Regarding apartment operations specifically?
Correct. Yeah.
I think one thing we're going to continue doing is our manager. So once you get past the, the initial lead generation and you have someone come look at an apartment, we'll probably get to what, like, we've started putting a lockbox on the door and letting the tenant go get in themselves. And then we of course come back behind them and check it. We'll probably keep that going because that's been something that we've gotten good feedback on.
Letting them walk without a property manager?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Mm-hmm. It's actually done all right, but I mean, we have, typically cameras on our apartments. So if anything were to go wrong, we know exactly who's there. Right. And usually the manager's sitting in the parking lot. So it's, they can't just go squat in there and do things they're not supposed to. Let's see what else. We're probably a little more heavily into internet marketing than we were before. I mean, we were always there, but that's, picked up quite a bit as well. I don't know. I'm trying to think what else we would keep in place. Trey, you have anything?
We will probably rethink cash reserves and what we hold in the bank. We were pretty aggressive from a cash management standpoint because the quicker you get cash out, higher IRR is, and there's a promote involved in that in the waterfall structure. So there's incentive to get cash out. And like you said, you can't ever plan for 25% collections or 20, like we were fortunate that 20 was probably our lowest, but I know mall landlords that were seeing 5 to 10 collections. Like you can't plan for that. If you were to build up that much reserves, you would never be able to get aggressive enough on pricing to justify winning a bid on a property and closing. But I still think we'll have to refine and maybe up our reserves a bit from where we were.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And I guess I'll second that. Although we keep a lot of reserves, we still didn't feel like they were enough, in some cases, for what we really. Yeah. And I guess the other thing that we're going to continue doing is really a little more research into our lenders before we agree to do a deal with somebody, like understanding who's giving them their money, who's giving that person their money, like the debt chain, and understanding kind of the market behind a given lender. I don't think we did enough of that before, and it almost bit us really hard, not understanding where that money was coming from. So that's something we'll probably keep.
Did you have any properties where you were in the midst of or thinking about refinancing them, and now because of this, you're like, leave the debt structure as it was?
I didn't have anything coming up for refi, no, but I do know some people who are in that boat. Like they started the same way as everyone else. They started a refi, and lenders just kind of go like, yeah, well, your terms are now this, and it's like, okay, well, it's not worth it. So we'll just. But it's even better if you're in a position to refi, you just step back and hold, right? There's no, unless you're in a situation where you're being forced to refi because you have something ballooning. Yeah, I mean, I think people just kind of step back and let it go. So
Are you seeing adjustment in pricing yet that you can quantify to like a general, 10% off what pricing was pre-COVID, or is it still too early?
I think it's still too early. About a 3-month delay, I feel like, is how the multifamily market responds to, I'm sure commercial real estate too, responds to a crisis or any sort of a market event. I've seen properties at lower prices than they would have been before, but they're still, I mean, anything broker marketed, they're still pushing, they're in denial and pushing forward, right? It's going to be when those deals that are being marketed right now, when they close 6 months from now, that's going to be where you really start to see the hard data. So I'd say not, I mean, do I see one-off deals that are looking lower than I would have probably had to pay for before? Yeah. I just got a line on something off market that's I'm probably going to have to upset that seller because he's probably going to have a different expectation. But yeah, I'm starting to see it, but you're not going to see the mean line shift yet, I don't think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. It's around the
Yeah.
same with single family as well. Single family still going around the same prices as well.
Yeah.
Is it?
So the reason I asked that is because I'm getting ready to refinance my house that I just finished renovating. And in talking to a coworker that's looking to buy a house, he said in the past 2 or 3 weeks, when he would go look at a house, they're starting to go for more than asking.
Yeah.
And one of the houses he looked at this weekend said they got 20 offers. Even if they're inflating that and they got 10, I mean, that's crazy because there's not much on the market for those that are looking. So, I mean, I guess it's a good thing. I see it as a good thing for me trying to refinance. If I take 2 months, house prices should go up.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because natural prices, like the modern homes, have still been going just outrageous.
Yeah. You got to think about liquidity there because, I mean, debt market liquidity, and I mean, they're not requiring those massive reserves for single family houses, right? So with interest
Mhm.
rates as low as they are, basic rule of thumb is interest rates are down, property prices are up because people can leverage higher and pay more. So that may be the effect we're seeing right now is one, limited inventory because people just said, I'm not going to deal with people being in my house and selling a house right now. And the other thing is the incessant drop in interest rates to try to stimulate the economy. That not studying the single family market a whole lot, that's what I think, but the other one thing that a friend of mine who is big in single family mentioned is if you're trying to get it reappraised and pull cash out based on interior things, make sure you can get it, like maybe you'll have to leave the house for 2 days and have the appraiser come in and whatever, but make sure you can get someone to go inside because they're doing a lot of drive-by appraisals right now. And if it's all interior and no exterior, you're going to get a worse appraisal than you are anticipating, right? Because they're just going to assume average on the inside.
Right.
That's one tip that I guess it was my guy at Wilson Bank and Trust told me, but it seemed to make sense.
Yeah.
So good luck though. Hope you get to take a couple rolls out of the house, you know?
Yeah, I have to.
That's good.
What about supply on multifamily deals? Are you seeing new stuff come out? Is it slow or is it more than you would have expected?
That's about on par. I don't see people not selling. If anything, I see more people looking at selling, but I think we're still in the denial phase where people still think they're going to get, 6 cap rates and below and things like that. And, the debt market supports it from the interest rate, but with these reserve requirements and the fact that you can't close a loan in less than 75 days right now, it's still there. I don't see people not selling, and I don't really see inventory drying up at all. Because that would insinuate that everyone has cash reserves and they can weather whatever storm comes, and they just choose to sit. But then, the distress sales are definitely going to be there, I think.
Yeah.
But who knows? That's Chad's opinion. So, Let me look over here. Brandon, you have any questions? I'll look at the chat box for a minute. Let's all awkwardly stare at the chat box for a second. I don't know if he's still there or not. All right, well, y'all, it was fun. I'm gonna go, hang on, we do have something, not too much. Reddit was talking about the lack of new supply being a cause of high prices. Oh, for sure, yeah, so, I mean, that definitely affects, you know, if there's less of something there, then low supply and high demand would drive that. And I guess if you're talking about multifamily in particular, if you guys read that, I know I've mentioned it before. If y'all read that book, Big Shifts Ahead, it's SHIFTS, Big Shifts Ahead. It really talks about the demographics of the populations today, where jobs are moving around the country and have been, you know, what the different generational behaviors are and kind of how that's driving things in real estate and economy and everything else. There is a long-term fundamental residential problem. And basically, in order to fix that problem, Adam may know this being in construction, but the number of permits pulled would have to be higher than they have been the last 3 years for the next 20 to catch up with demand for affordable multifamily housing. Mobile home parks are drying up. They're losing those at about 200 a year because city planners don't want them in their master plan, right? So that's still a very cash lucrative investment, but it's a dying breed. So get them if you can. But no matter what we have going on right now, the fundamental supply and demand problem for affordable residential housing is only getting worse, and there's no sign of it getting better. So I still really believe in this asset class. I think as long as you can have enough cash to weather a temporary storm over the long haul, we're going to continue to see that to be a very stable asset. It's going to continue to be in high demand. And, you know, if you're affordable class B and C housing, you're never going to want for tenants, you know, as long as you price them right. So anyway, well, I'm going to go hang with my wife for a little while, if you don't mind. It's been fun. This was a good discussion. Really appreciate y'all joining, and I hope we can get together in person again soon. You know, I feel like our numbers are off a little bit, but you know, we'll talk about that. Maybe we'll scale back on the PowerPoint and spreadsheet stuff, and we'll just go have beer somewhere and talk, and you know,
Sounds good.
We'll figure it out. So. All right.
Appreciate it, Chad.
Well, I will have my assistant post this recording probably tomorrow or the next day. It's going to have to go process on the cloud, but yeah, talk to you guys next time. Okay.
All right, everybody. Be careful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.